Welcome, everybody, to another fun episode here on Isles Talk. My name is Paul Kreischer. Joining me this evening are, I'm going to call them two mentors. One of them just left me abruptly. I have no idea, but that's
I
par for
lost the
the
connection,
course.
Paul. My apologies.
I know you did.
But throw me under the bus anyway. That's good.
Typical,
Yeah.
typical. First off, one of my first mentors here, Gary Harding. Gary, how are you?
Hi, Paul. It's always a pleasure to see your smiling face.
Oh God, here we go. Shut up. Anyway, to the real reason why we're here tonight, I
Absolutely.
consider him a mentor. I have been watching, I should say, listening to the Hockey Prospect Radio on Sirius XM now for years. I've learned so much from him and Brad Allen. I do consider him a mentor still. He has not been to Milford lately, so I still owe him dinner at some point. He is Shane Malloy. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing great, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on the show. It's always appreciated, and it's a fun time for Islander fans. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to unpack with this organization, so we should probably get at it right away.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So, real quick, I wanted to get some brief thoughts from you about Matthew Darsh becoming the new GM of the Islanders.
Interesting enough, well, I had the opportunity to speak with him for well over an hour a couple summers ago, and what I took away from the conversation is he's very intelligent in a very thoughtful way, like in terms of he thinks about things in a calculated way. He is certainly a critical thinker, and that he isn't someone who I think necessarily would succumb to emotion in decision making, or someone that in a situation would not make decisions without really going through his due diligence of understanding all the data points. And data can be quantitative, qualitative, like data is just simply information. And sometimes we get hung up on data being numbers, but that's not really the case. So I think if from that standpoint, I think he's someone that can grow continuously into that role. And he's certainly been mentored by someone like, Julian Breesbaugh, who is equally as intelligent, but also very calculating and cunning in terms of the decisions he makes. And so I'm curious to see what happens with Matthew in this role. What I'm most actually intrigued with is not necessarily the roster on the ice, whether that be in New York or in Bridgeport or prospects that they draft, is who he hires in his management staff. So who are going to be his lieutenants? Is he going to keep Steve Pellegrini? What's he going to do with an assistant general manager that runs personnel, like the amateur and pro staff? Who's going to be assistant GM potentially in Bridgeport? Because that was a bit of a disaster this year in terms of their win-loss record. Certainly it's difficult on prospects when you get your head caved in every night. So for me, when I look at it, every NHL team is a Fortune 500 company. And the general manager is the CEO of the operations department. And no CEO in the history of the world can walk into any company and wave their magic wand and everything's going to work out fine. They're really dependent upon the core people around him to help make decisions. At the end of the day, it's Matthew Darsh's decision from that standpoint. However, how intelligent and how thoughtful and how those people collectively come together, that's going to be the strength of the organization. So who he hires, I think, is more important than the players on the ice. Because at the end of the day, when you look at hockey operations, the players on the ice and the results on the ice are just a reflection of the decisions you make in the amateur department, the pro scouting department, your management, your player development, your analytics department, your R&D department. That's it. So at the end of the day, if the team doesn't do well, I don't blame the players. I directly look to hockey operations because you're the ones who made those decisions. So that will be the interesting point for me when it comes to who Matthew hires.
Moving forward now, about a month or so away now to the draft. after everyone has been hired, hopefully, and everyone is set, we'll see who comes and we'll see who goes. It's draft time, folks, and I wanted to do this show before we get into the draft Misa, draft Hagens, draft Schaefer here. I want Islander fans to keep an open mind heading into the draft because a lot can still change before the draft. Not a rumor, it's just a thought. We don't know who the Islanders are really going to draft yet. I'm sure all options are open, but this is not the show to talk about that. This is literally a preview of what the Islanders could be doing in a month's time. But before we get into the players, I want to talk about the draft itself. And for those of you who saw the show almost 2 years ago, Shane and I really talked about the anatomy of the draft moving forward. But for the younger fans who didn't see the show, Shane, how difficult is it for first rounders to get into the NHL? What are the percentages? What are those numbers since the salary cap era?
Well, certainly. So you're looking at 2005. I've done a lot of studies on 2005 to 2016. I'm still working on 16 to 20, as that's
Right,
still an ongoing process. But there's enough time gone by where if the players were going to meet a certain games played criteria, they would have done so by now. So when you're looking at the first round, where the drop off hits, like when you get from that first pick to the 10th pick, that's a 94 percentile chance that they're going to play more than 200 games. We're not going to talk about quality. We're just going to talk
right,
about the quantity. So it's a
sure,
94 percentile chance they're going to play more than 200 games. How good they are, there's a bunch of different variables involved in that. But then the next grouping, if you look from 11 down to 22, that is approximately 75%. It's 74.16 to be precise, of a player in that grouping playing 200 games or more. So when you're in that top 22, like unless things go horribly bad,
totally wrong.
you're going to get a player. Now, whether that is a first line player, a second line forward, top pairing, second pairing defenseman, they generally fall within that range of the top 22. Now, you can get those players later on. That does happen, but the probability of that is much, much lower. One of the draft is that 23 to 32. And when you, even if you get down to, you're looking at that grouping, the average is only 50%. It's a coin flip from 23 to 32. It's a coin flip whether that player plays 200 games, and primarily it's one of two things. Sometimes this is where teams have traded away their first round pick for assets at the trade deadline, and a weaker team has accumulated those. And then what they do when they have multiple picks is they may look at it as in a risk assessment. They'll take a more sure pick higher up and they'll swing for the fences low. And that
Right,
may end up being a player who is an offensive player who is either a primary scorer or a primary playmaker, but doesn't have an established B game. So they either play on a second line or they don't play at all. That happens
right,
often in that grouping. The other part is it's the narrative of first round picks. I don't view players
Oh,
hold on, give me a
determination
minute.
of everything.
Mhm.
So am I back? There was a
Yep, you're
hiccup there.
back
I
yeah,
now.
see.
you're back.
I'm back. So, as I was
Yep,
saying, there is variables involved in that 23 to 32 when you're talking about a coin flip of 50-50 is teams will sometimes take greater risks, but also it's the narrative of, oh, he's a first round pick. But not all first round picks are equal. Like
no,
you can't compare a 12th overall to a 27th overall. That's a large range of talent in that and time frame of what it requires for that player to play 200 games. to even reach that benchmark. What happens sometimes at that lower end of that draft, and I've observed this over the last 25 years, is teams will push those players further along into either the American League or into the NHL faster than they should be. So what ends up happening is the kid plays in the NHL too early. They throw him in the deep end of the pool with an anchor and they tell him to swim. And what ends up happening with young players is, particularly before the age of 23, is their frontal lobe of their brain hasn't finished developing yet. That's higher reasoning and decision making. So they are consistently inconsistent. Remember what we were like in our early 20s? We were probably a mess, right? Like
Young and stupid.
Oh, Paul was definitely a mess.
Yeah, young and stupid, and it's actually normal. You're supposed to be consistently inconsistent. That's a normal behavior.
Yep.
So what gets lost in that is what you're trying to do is establish better habits in that player to change their behavior on and off the ice. So that is the experimental time for them between the ages of 18 and 23. And the NHL team's job is to help build habits to build behaviors to get them to that point. And if you push a kid into a situation they're not ready for, what happens is we get into survival mode. All human beings are like this. We never rise to the challenge. We only fall to our level of habits. So what happens in survival mode is you revert back to your primal state, and they don't evolve. Like, you don't get any better because you're constantly in survival mode. And that's what happens a lot of times in that area of that 23 to 32, which I find a really fascinating part of the first round, is who's chosen and why, and then how patient you're going to be. And if you go back into history of the NHL draft, teams like Washington, even the Islanders actually historically been quite good in this area, but Washington, LA, Anaheim have been really strong in those areas. And it's no surprise because they're also teams that are consistently in the top 5 of efficiency of drafting, right? They're very patient with their players and they allow them to develop. If you don't do that, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you just blow assets out the door, right? And you can't afford that, and especially with the Islanders. They haven't, like, for 4 years, they haven't had a first-round pick, right? There was a span there before they picked up Yzerman last year's draft. Well, you can only rob Peter to pay Paul for so long. So now it's time to, and I'm an advocate of understanding the value of draft picks, where if there's an established player who is his worth and value is well worth that pick and more, then make the trade. I don't have a problem with that. But also, you can't go for years, 3 or 4 years without having a first round pick. Sooner or later, it's going to bite you in the rear end. And this is what's happened with this organization. Goaltending's fine. Defense, fine. Forwards, problematic at best. And then farm team, abysmal. There's not a lot there. Thankfully, Richie's coming. Yzerman's coming. Like, Danny Nelson's coming. Hopefully, Odulius and
Odulius is there.
And Polkinen have to. They need to both play at. Yeah. It's okay if they're third pairing defensemen. If that's your third pair, and they play, that's fine. That's fine, right? You can focus and rebuild that top 4 with other draft picks. But if you can get, 2 second-round picks, if that can be your third pair, that actually is a benefit. And it's not a diminish, because the second round, on average, it's only 40% chance that you're going to get a player to play 200 games. So there's a 60% failure rate on average.
And Shane, just as you were saying before that, going for the 3 years without number ones, look at the 2 number ones that we picked before that 3-year waste: Kiefer Bellows, Oliver Wahlstrom.
Right.
So they're guys that, as you said, the brain wasn't all there, I don't think. And their growth got completely stunted.
Part of it may have been they got brought in too soon. I like the fact now that the CHL players are going to be eligible to go play in college hockey. What I want to see is the lengthening of development time. It's one thing that hockey doesn't have that baseball has that I like, is they have a single A, double A, triple A. So we could potentially treat junior hockey, whether it be in the USHL or the CHL or the J20 leagues in Europe, as single A. Double A is college, right? Or the Allsvenskan in Sweden, right? Like there's a projection of that. And then the American League is triple A. So let them go through their paces. So if you do draft a kid out of the CHL and they get to the point where they're too advanced for the CHL because on average they're playing against 18-and-a-half-year-old players, they go to college, on average they're playing against 21-and-a-half-year-old players, right? They're not necessarily always better in terms of skill set and hockey sense, but they're bigger, stronger, faster, more structured game, right? It's still a challenge for those players to play in against those players. So there's some changes in the hockey landscape that we still don't know how it's going to play out. It's that law where like unintended consequences, we don't quite know how that's going to play out. But for my estimation, I like when players have the ability to extend their development time before they go into the American Hockey League. The American Hockey League is a meat grinder. It's a really difficult league for young players to go in and thrive in. And if a rookie comes in the American League as a forward and he gets half a point a game, that's a great season for them. It's really
especially in his
difficult.
first year. Yeah.
Yes, as a rookie, I watched many of first-year CHL players go into the American League and second-round picks, late first-round picks, and just get their rear end handed to them. Just get chewed up. And by Christmas, I talked to them, and they look like a deer caught in headlights. They're not prepared for it.
Right.
On the ice and off the ice, they're just not prepared. So we're going to see how that sort of plays out. But this is an advantage for the Islanders. They can be patient because they have the goalie and they have a good young defense core. They have a couple guys that are a little bit older, but time is on their side, and time is their greatest asset. So accumulate as many young prospects as you possibly can, and even potentially trade for some in other organizations that are maybe in that 20, 21, 22 year range that, maybe they've hasn't worked out for them and they can accumulate them.
So, speaking of the draft moving forward and collecting more draft picks, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, I was just gonna switch gears a little bit and maybe maybe Shane, you can give some of the people that are listening an idea. They always hear the expressions, it's a strong draft, it's a weak draft. Just take us through, if you will, like as far as like a season goes, and how, in some cases, obviously there is the level of play that determines things, but there's got to be other factors that say, where they're saying in October when the season starts that, oh yeah, this draft looks like it's going to be great. And then by March or April, certain players have moved down the chain so far and other players have moved up the chain. I'm just wondering how that process goes as a season goes on.
Well, this is the reason why I don't put out lists until the end. I don't, because honestly, we are in data collection mode from draft -1 until the time you no longer have any more time until you have to make a decision, put a list together.
Mm-hmm.
That's all data collection mode. So, and I understand you have to feed the beast, which is the fan base, and you have to be able to give them information and lists, and so you keep them engaged. But for me personally, I just don't do that. I had to do that because it was necessity of the job that I had done, but I don't do that anymore because also it's not productive for me. It's because what ends up happening is you put a player in a position, and human beings, we love to be right. We love to be right?
That's
and then you have to come off that position, right? Because it's an ongoing process. So I have to protect myself from myself. I'm my biggest problem. So that's why I don't put lists out until I just put out my top 65 list for this year's draft. Just recently, a week and a half ago, because there was just no more data to collect. There was a little bit of the Memorial Cup, but that wasn't going to influence or change anything. What those players were what they're going to be and what their positions, how they were going to be positioned in the draft. That didn't change anything. So that is the challenge for the people that publicly have to put out lists. Is you got to be able to be malleable in that situation.
Mhm.
That's really, really challenging. And what it does is also when you make a statement of, oh, this is a strong draft, this is a weak draft, what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean it's strong in terms of quantity? Do you mean it's strong in terms of quality? Do you mean it's strong in both? Like, what is it? Or is it in the inverse side? Is it weak? Okay. Is it weak in quantity or quality or both? Right. Like, we'll give you a frame of reference. The average number of players that'll play 200 games or goalies 50 or more games is 59 players. That's the average, right? Historically. So low watermark is the draft was 1999. It was horrific. It was 41 players. The high watermark was 2015. It was 71 players.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
So if we're looking at this draft class, I only had 50 players who I thought would play 200 games or more. Normally, I would be like, if it was average, it would be 59. So to me, it's not a weak draft. It's a below average draft in terms of quantity, not
Right.
quality. Right? Quality's still there. You're going to get them, but in every one of my ranges, if you look at my top 65 list, I break that down in terms of ranges. In each range, you're not the A players, but A minus, B plus, B and B minus. You're missing 2 players in each grouping. And if you added that up, there's an average.
There's a 10
In
difference.
terms of,
Yeah.
There's the average in terms of quantity, and the
Mhm.
quality is there, so it's fine. The reason why I cut it off at 50 is there was a group of forwards who I thought, based on the data collected and the scouting, is that they were more one-dimensional forwards that had a really high A game. Like, they would either be a second line forward or nothing, right? Because they didn't have a B game at all. So that would have to be entirely built from the age 18 to 23. They're going to have to build a B game. And that's the danger is, say if they are what I call a C plus player, which is a specifically like a specified skill player, like you have to play in a specific role. The problem is, if to be an second line player, an A minus, that difference between a C plus player to an A minus, that's a lot of work for that player to get there. And then what's the probability of them doing that? It's so low that I have to push them back down. So not to pick on players, but there's a group of players from 51 to about 59 in my group that I'm like, okay, I understand and appreciate and value their A game in terms of their skill set, hockey sense, but they don't bring anything else to the table.
Gotcha.
I don't want to pick on Sven Barchi, but it was almost the Sven Barchi dilemma of he either plays on a second line or he doesn't play at all. Right. And there's a lot of players that end up do that in the NHL, like that are drafted and try to get into the NHL. They're so one-dimensional. And look, and the reason why I end up doing that is I went back and looked at, okay, what do teams covet at the trade deadline? What do they covet in free agency? And how is the playoffs played? And which players are most successful in that? And I took all that information and applied it back to the draft. So when you hear, like this weekend, we're reviewing my top 32 picks. I have Jason Bukala from Sportsnet, who was a former director of amateur scouting. So he's on to analyze that with me. And one of the things we end up talking about a lot, particularly with the players that I had my top 32, was I was more intrigued with their B game than it was their A game. Of, okay, the difference between choices and decisions, and either their willingness to play in the dirty area, and they're willing, like there was different types of skill sets that are required to play in the playoffs. And I was more interested in that, because at the end of the day, even if their A game falters a little bit, they have that and they're going to be a player that's valued in the playoffs. So my draft list reflects that. So I may seem more conservative than to other public draft lists. And it's only because I tend, particularly when there's less quantity or quality, I tend to draft to the floor more than I will to the ceiling. So I'm much more floor oriented, because I look at it from, if I have a general manager, my job for him is to collect assets. I have to provide assets to him. And many times you'll hear out there, oh, that player, he's only a third line forward, or he's only a number 4 defenseman. But they're a third line forward and a number 4 defenseman in the best league in the world. They're a
Right.
valued asset. So what would you rather have in your draft? A zero? Because you can't afford zeros, right? This is why you fall to the mushy middle or down into the pits, into the bottom 8, is by having zeros in a draft year where you don't get any players. So that's like a really long-winded way of like trying to define what a week draft is, but then understanding what the variables are that you have to play with in that draft scenario.
That really makes a lot of sense, though. I really appreciate that. That's a great explanation.
Yeah. And Shane, I'll put myself on the spot here, Gary, after that Paul's never wrong comment. Shane, correct me if I'm wrong here, and this is very elementary. This is very rudimentary from me. When I try to explain the draft, like in this particular draft, to fans, like a basic understanding, I always tell them in a weak draft, it's not that the talent really isn't there per se, but it's going to take these kids longer to develop than some of these other drafts. Am I off on that?
No,
Or
that's a fair statement.
okay,
In many cases, when it comes to when we say it's weak in quantity, it's
sure,
because, as I mentioned, there's certain players who haven't developed a B game yet, or don't have any
yes,
indication of a B game yet. Now, here's an example of a player that, when I saw him in junior, didn't have a B game, but developed one after he was drafted. And that's Connor Garland
right,
in Vancouver. Like, you saw him
right,
in Moncton, he was a one-dimensional offensive player, playmaker, a goal scorer. He's a dual threat. But it was explained to him when he got into the American Hockey League, look, if you don't evolve your game, if you don't establish a defensive side and this like angry, aggressive puck pursuit game off the puck,
right,
you're going to spend the rest of your career in the American Hockey League. To his
right,
credit, he evolved into that. And that
right,
is the unknown with about 8 players in this grouping that I'm not sure about. The other factor is, like, I really like to look at behavior in players, particularly when it's the
yes,
hardest time of the play. So if you're looking for, I'll use an example of junior hockey in Canada in the CHL. What's the toughest environment for a player to play in? It's back-to-back games, 3 and 4 nights on the road against teams above 500. So how do you play in those circumstances when you are matched up in the difficult situations? You got the top defense pair against you, you have the top lines against you, and do you produce? And then how do you produce, if you do at all? Because it
right,
says something to me about your behavior, but then allows me to break apart their behavior into habits. And if those habits aren't transferable, that's problematic. Because what happens when the talent pool compresses at the American League level, and then it compresses again at the NHL level? Like, if you don't have these established habits off the puck, then you're in trouble. It's one of the things
right,
I had brought up to Jason Bukala. Um, when you watch a player play, and say he plays 20 minutes in a game, how much of that 20 minutes does he actually have the puck on his stick? Is it 4%, 5% at most? Think
right,
about that. That means you're on the ice 95% of the time, you don't have the puck in your stick. So what are
right,
you doing to help your team win?
right,
Right. And if you look at the Florida Panthers or teams that have gone on, like the LA Kings in 2012, 2014, like all the Stanley Cup winners or teams that get to the conference finals and beyond, they're established players, whether it be defensive, the defensemen, or the forwards, their off puck game is at the highest level. That's why those teams are successful.
right,
Right. So, and it's one of the things why that's why I like to establish that back to the draft and
right,
go, can I find players who have those habits? They may not be fully realized,
sure,
and the behavior may not be consistent, but you can see that, okay, right, there's 2 or 3 pieces of that. And then how do they handle duress? Like, how
right,
quickly? I like to look at players in terms of their resilience, and
right,
resilience sometimes isn't very well defined, but it's really about, when you're really high or really low, how quickly you get back to that equilibrium of the middle where you're at your natural best. That's resilience, right? And putting yourself back there. How quickly do players do that? Because that's really important. It's interesting how, like, you can have big players, fast players, all this talent and skill, but in the end of the day, 90% of it's between your ears. It's that gray matter. And that's what I'm really trying to understand in players is I'm really trying to watch their behavior and habits because, you know, you're going to have to some point probably change them and adapt them. And can you do that in players? So I apply that back to the draft as best I can, but it's incredibly difficult. Like, cause we're trying to project some 18-year-old kid into a 23-year-old man. Like I have 2 kids at home. I have no idea what the hell they're going to be. I don't know.
Right.
So, and I'm their dad. So how am I supposed to figure out some other kids? Right. It's not, and I think sometimes, and look, I'm an advocate of the scouts. I will give them grief or give them love or grief when they deserve it. But I also respect and understand how difficult the job is. I worked as a scout in USHL. So I've been in the room. I've had my ass handed to me when I've made mistakes. So, but I understand how difficult that job is. It's the hardest job in hockey. So it's just not, it's easy to look back 5 years and say, oh, why didn't you take that guy? Right.
Sure.
Or like, I've had people say to me, oh, why didn't like teams take Dustin Byfuglien? He went in the 5th round. Well, if you saw Dustin Byfuglien when he was 18 years old, he was 285 pounds.
Right.
Like he had no business playing in the NHL, but to his credit, busted his rear end, turned himself into an NHL player, 240 pounds of a behemoth, and had a great career. But that's a risk assessment, right? It's great to look at it 5 or 6 years down the road, but you didn't even know what he was like when he was 18. And that's the hard part.
Right. Okay. So let's fast forward here a little bit now. The Islanders, they get the first overall pick, not because, well, partially because of their record, but it wasn't the worst record in the NHL. They won the draft lottery. Do the Islanders go best player available, or do they go out of necessity? And what I mean by necessity is something that you already brought up, Shane. The Islanders lost 4 draft picks, 4 first-round draft picks. They got one back in Cal Ritchie. The Islanders do have this first pick. Do you see the Islanders maybe trading down 1 or 2 spots to pick up a couple of extra prospects and still maybe pick up a Schaefer, Misa, Hagens? I mean, we've seen it done before in the past, but what would you do in this case? Would you go best player available?
Well, best player available, that term is kind of nebulous to me.
Good.
And the reason why I say that is best player according to whom? Because each NHL team's criteria of what best player available is different. And what does that mean to that organization, or what do you value? Right.
Beautiful.
So when anybody throws out best player available, I actually scoff at the term, not to be mean, but it just doesn't mean anything to me. Right. Unless I
do this on purpose to you, though.
Right. Like I need to understand what your value system is before I can actually make like a judgment on that. So
remember, it's Paul.
Right. Like, hey, like this is what I look at. If I'm looking at it from this perspective, is if it was my choice, I'd take Matthew Schaefer.
Okay.
And here are the reasons why. One is because he's a defenseman and he projects to be a first pairing defenseman. So I look at it from a couple economic model standpoints. Scarcity is one. What's the likelihood of ever drafting a first pairing defenseman? It's very, very rare. If you have to go get a first pairing defenseman, what is the cost in the marketplace, whether it's a trade or in free agency? It's exorbitant. So if you have the opportunity to do that, from that standpoint. So that's a scarcity standpoint, and then it's a cost value as well. Is how many minutes do first pairing defensemen play? How much do they impact the organization? And if you're going to win, like you can have, like, I'll use Connor Bedard as an example. What I had thought of what the Chicago Blackhawks should do next is not go and find wingers to put around him. Build the best defense core and the best goaltender you can possibly find in front of him. Wingers are easier to find. You
Yes.
can find wingers, but it's really difficult to find a top end goaltender and a six defenseman who are rock stars, like a really solid that, because if you can't score against them and they can move the puck out of their zone and they break up plays, what happens? The puck is going back in the other direction as soon as possible. Forwards love great defense cores. They can talk all their day about having a great centerman, but they'll take better defensemen instead of that. The other thing, what it establishes for the Islanders of not overthinking this and taking Schaefer over, a top end center like Misa or Hagens or Denoyer or
Hmm.
Frondell, is look at the pair that you're going to build moving forward for potentially an 8 to 10 year span. You're going to have Noah Dobson on one side and Matthew Schaefer on the other. Like, think about the defense pairs in the NHL that are this two-headed monster. Now, I'm not saying that this is how it's going to turn out, but you can look at what's in Colorado with Makar and Taves. You could look at into the past with Pronger and Niedermeyer in Anaheim. I'm not saying that this is exactly what this pair is going to look like, but
Right. But there's chemistry there.
what also it does is it pushes other defensemen down into a slot that's more appropriate for their skill set.
Right.
Right. From that standpoint. And that's where I think drafting Matthew Schaefer, and one of the reasons why I think it's so appropriate, is it's very rare to find a defenseman with that skating ability and that hockey sense, because what he does best defensively is he takes away time and space. He breaks up plays before they hit the blue line, because he's able, with his gap control, his angles, his stick, and his skating, to take away time and space. It was a conversation we had with Rick Nash, who's the director of player development, and he's moving up the ranks in Columbus. And he said, as a player and as a forward, what irritated him and aggravated him the most were the defensemen who just got in the way, the Mark Edward Vlasics of the world, right? Who are just like Nick Lidstrom. They're always in the way. They don't have to bang and crash you. They just take away your time and space, and they got the stick, and there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. They just break up stuff before they. And then his ability to retrieve the puck. So if a puck gets dropped in his zone, he can be able to get back faster than everybody else and get the puck. He's going to be able to pre-scan quicker than anybody else. He knows exactly where that puck's going to go. He's got two options. The first option is usually the best, right? But the advantage, because of his skating, his hockey sense, is without the puck, a second saved is a second earned. And that's going to change. Like, the forwards on that team are going to love having him there, because his ability to move the puck and transport the puck and get to the puck quickly. Like, now, if they do draft him, I do not advocate for him to come into the Island next year. I do not at all, because he missed all that time to injury. He has to go back. Like, don't get all excited because he's a first overall pick and that's what first overall picks do. I don't care. Like, this is a special circumstance. Put him back. Actually, you know what he should probably do is, I don't even know if I think at this point he might be too good for the CHL already. And he didn't play many games. That just tells you the level of hockey sense and puck skills and skating ability he has. Is he might be better off, and I know the CHL doesn't want to hear this, he might be better off going to play in college. Yeah. He might be better off to go play against 21-and-a-half-year-olds. Play 40 games, get bigger, stronger, faster. I don't know if he can get much faster. He might, but he certainly has to get bigger and stronger, right? Physically, right? And take that year of he only plays 40 games instead of 68 games and give that time to be able to build up and recover from injury and build up to the point where understand you're coming in as a rookie, probably as a 19-year-old, and you're going to play, and you're going to play a lot. Right. So that's a situation. But the other advantage is he can be insulated. He's got Dobson, and look at that core group. Romanov, Pollock, like, that's a group that, like, not very often where you have a defenseman. This is the Islanders' advantage. Not very often you get a young defenseman. Generally, your defense core is weak when you're drafting that high. It's generally a mess. So they get thrown into the fire and they're trying to survive. He doesn't have to do that. He's insulated. He's got 4 defensemen there to insulate him when things get rough. So that is a massive advantage, because what it helps him is develop in a timeline that's more appropriate for his age. Even though he's advanced in terms of his hockey sense and puck skills, he's still a kid. He's still
Right.
a kid, right? And for Islander fans, if they do draft Matthew Schaefer, is temper your enthusiasm for him coming into the NHL right away. Like, just like, it's like you guys won the lottery. You got, like, you won a Ferrari. Be happy you got it. You don't get it right away, right?
Nope.
You got to show some patience. You know, instant gratification probably isn't in your future. So relax, but the upside of that is huge. And this is nothing taken away from Michael Misa or Caleb Denoyer or Ferndale or Hagens. It's just that particular position is more valued to me
Mm-hmm.
than a centerman or especially a winger. But even a first line center, if I can get a first pairing D or a number one D, I'm taking him every day of the week.
Beautiful. For some of us who are older, it would be very Islander like if we did not draft Matthew Schaefer and we went for a forward. So the other 33% chance here for fans of tonight's show, why would the Islanders draft Michael Misa?
Why? Because he'll be a number one. Has the potential to be a number one center in the NHL. Plain and simple. Hockey sense, puck skills, skating ability. What separates him is his deception, his ability to draw players in and move the puck effectively, find holes, find seams. Like, it's really impressive in terms of understanding how he can create time and space for himself with his puck skills, his hockey sense. I think he is a dual threat, so he's equally dangerous as a passer and as a shooter. And he's going to end up being 6'1", well over 200 pounds. So he's going to be able to control the middle of the ice defensively, and so that's not going to be an issue. He's not going to be a he's not going to be a Jonathan Taves type of defensive center, but I think he's going to
Right.
be able to hold defensively, which isn't going to be a problem. He certainly won't be a liability. He'll be fine, but his
Right.
offense is really going to separate him from everybody else. So if they do go the Michael Misa way, I totally understand why. Because you have this really nice two-headed monster with him and Bo Horvat. And
Right.
Horvat's so strong defensively and two-way and reliable that he's an insulator for him. Right.
Nice.
And then if you have to swing in, obviously Matt Barzal can swing in and play center if need be. I like him on the wall, but he's perfectly adaptable to playing center too. So if they went that way, I would understand. It wouldn't be my choice.
Right.
I would go with the defenseman because I think the defenseman long term has greater value.
I'm gonna do this segue real quick. I wanted to make sure this was legit, and sure enough, it is. The other option that the Islanders are looking at, probably. Give me one moment. Uh, Peter Burst wants to know, why is Russ Cohen picking James Higgins as the first overall?
That's very easy. Now, my compadre, Russ Cohen, has a bias towards American-born players
Fair enough.
and players who have played in the program and college players. And the other fact is he's a Long Islander too. He's
Yes,
from
he is.
Massapequa, right?
Yes, he is.
So there's a bias there. So he's been my friend for 25 years, but I'm going to have to, not only will I throw him under the bus, I'll drive the bus, I'll go around the block, and I'm going to run him over. And then I may back up and run him back over again, because that's what you get when you say things like that. So that's
Right.
okay. We're gonna go
Right.
head to head. We're gonna go head to head on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. Russ and I always do this. We do a fun mock draft with Mick Kern, and so yeah, I'll once again just obliterate him and leave him on the side of the road. And I'll go to the pub, have a couple beers. I'll get somebody to drive us, and we'll pick him up afterwards, right?
There we
Because
go.
I can't be that cruel, right? I gotta go pick him up.
But what would the Islanders be getting if they draft James Higgins?
They would get a similar player to Clayton Keller.
Okay.
A similar player to I don't necessarily know he's as offensively talented as a Jack Hughes, but they're close. But you're going to get an offensive dynamo who can electrify the crowd, who is a dominant player on a power play, and is the potential to be a game breaker. He has that. The downside is he's not a big player. He's not a big kid. So when you're playing on the road and you don't have the last line change, he's going to have more difficulty defending in the middle of the ice in those situations and in the playoffs. So that is going to be the potential liability. I'm not saying he's going to be bad at it. He could be average defensively, and that's enough for him to be a dominant player to put up 80 points a year or more, right? There is that possibility. I'd like to see him stay in college. Don't turn pro. Like he's got it. Like there's some other aspects of the game. So I do not deny his skill set, but I'm more conservative when it comes to my centerman, which is why I have Hagens at 6 overall. So I do have, Denoyer and Misa and Frondel ahead of him because of their not only size, but their B game and defensive aspect. That comes into play for me. But I mean, obviously I don't think he's a bad player, or I wouldn't have him 6 overall. Right. So if I'm sitting 6, the player I'm taking is Hagens. Like I'm taking him. Right. I'm just not drinking the Kool-Aid of the rah-rah USA, flag wearing of, waving of Russ Cohen. Right.
Yeah,
it's okay. Right?
I've heard those conversations.
It's okay. So like, I'm going to have to temper his enthusiasm as his Canadian friend of simmer down. It's going to be okay. Right. So I tease and jest, but he has in the past hit some dingers in that area. He did have Brady Tkachuk at 2nd overall, and that was the right decision in his draft class. Right. We both had Matthew Tkachuk high because we also like bad and evil players. And both of them are like that, and I mean that in the most complimentary way, right? Those guys, those are the kind of guys you win in the playoffs with, right? But to fight against that, to combat that, you need a Schaefer, you need a Matthew Schaefer to combat that, right? So it's the division the Islanders are in is not easy, so build it up from the back end, and forget whatever Russ Cohen's ever told you.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to put this to a different perspective here, Gary. Matthew Darsh is definitely into business. That's been well documented lately. It's the language that owner Scott Malkin relates to.
Amen to that.
As a season ticket holder, what would it mean for the Islanders to finally draft one of their own, possibly building up hockey on Long Island? What would that mean for Islander fans? What would that mean for you? Would that be a factor?
Let me just put a little personal spin on this. Every summer here on the island, there is a program called Hockey is Hockey. It's a whole weekend devoted to the game, where they have, all sorts of clinics, roller and high ice combined. There's a place now out further east towards Riverhead that they do this at. It's a great brand new facility. Actually, the arena is called the Ed Westfall Arena. So it's, brings back to the Long Island heritage. And I've been involved with it for the last few years. I do the PA for their ice hockey game and their roller hockey game, and they get some former NHLers, some AHLers, some USA roller hockey guys and stuff. And last summer's tournament, both James and his brother played, and I was able to spend about 10 minutes talking with him. And such a lovely kid. I mean, his family they've done a tremendous job with both those kids. They're very soft-spoken, very eloquent, very respectful. And just watching him, that was the first time I really got to get a good look at him. And I'm like, wow. I said, this kid's going to turn he's going to go crazy up in BC. And he had a good season. Everybody saying, and everybody was saying to him,
He had a great season. He was a freshman.
yeah.
He was a
But
freshman. He's an 18-year-old kid playing against 21 and a half on average year-old like players, and he was a point a game player. And everybody targeted him. You don't think the other opposition didn't target him? They went after him hard. So like this is one of the it's something that ends up happening in scouting, in the scouting fraternity, is sometimes the collective group is too hard on college players and European that are draft eligible, and European players that are draft eligible that play pro, whether it be like Allsvenskan or the Swedish Elite League or Liga or anything like, or in the in the Czech Elite League. They're harder on them, and it's unfair. And they give and I'm a Canadian, but they give the CHL players way more leeway. But they're also playing against boys, and these kids are playing against young men or seasoned veterans. So,
do you also think, Shane, in that case, I was going to ask this before, but being the fact that the CHL plays a 68-game season, and it's as close to a full NHL season as you can get, does that give I mean, you say they get harder on the college guys. Is that a disadvantage necessarily?
Well, I think one of the things is human beings, we like numbers. So the bigger the number, the more we're excited. And so you see Michael Misa ripping up 2 points per game, plays, if he plays 65 games, he has 130 points. Everybody goes crazy for that. If James Hagens, what would he be if he played for Kitchener, right? Or Oshawa or London? What would he would have put up? He probably would have put up close to 2 points a game as well. He probably would have been somewhere between 1.5 and 2 points per game.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. Right? It's relative to that. So in terms of, sometimes that does happen. Like, I'm not diminishing James Hagen's his value, because I obviously have him 6th overall. So I think he has potential.
No, exactly. I agree.
But I just look at it. Okay, who are the players that are slightly ahead? Like, the margin of errors, really, of difference, is quite small, right? But there always has to be a separating factor. And why I have Schaefer there is, one, because I think he's an exceptional defenseman, but two, because he's a defenseman.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
It's this scarcity again is a factor in that regard. So what Hagens could do for that franchise, look, he would invigorate it, and the fans would go nuts because he's a local. Like, you can't diminish or discount that local hero phenomenon that happens. But that doesn't mean that's the right choice in that circumstance.
Oh, no, I agree. And that's what I was just going to continue on, is that a lot of the conversation was to him, you could be the number one pick, and it was like, imagine if the Islanders somehow found a way to get it. What would it be like? And somebody brought that actually up to him then. And he's like, I didn't even think of that. He's like, I'm just, that's why I say he's such a good kid that way.
Well,
but looking at it from a business, what?
He wouldn't even have thought of that, because what's the likelihood of them having a high pick?
At that time, of course.
Right.
But that's the way the typical Long Island fan is, believe it or not. But anyway,
that's like every fan; they're fanatics, right?
Yeah. But the point I was just trying to make is, I look at it as a 38-year season ticket holder to the Islanders. We haven't had, with all the success and everything else they really haven't had that. Other than one or two people, that Long Island connection. And you wonder how, if that pick was theirs, if they took them at number one, what that would mean to the community and so many other things that the Islanders are trying to do to build themselves up, not just in the league, but locally in the local towns. I mean, yes, it's a New York hockey team, but it's far, it's like 8,000 miles from New York when you think about it.
Yeah.
You don't talk about it, nobody knows. And I think it's a great story. It's a Hollywood story. If the local kid gets picked number one and does something great, I mean, that's what movies are made of. But the brain, for me, just sitting here, the brain inside here is saying, yeah, it's a great story. I would love to see it. I can definitely dream of it, but I really think, and from your talking and a couple of things I've heard, you got to do the right thing for this organization, looking at it now and 2 and 3 and 4 years down the road, and definitely Shea for sure.
If he was 6'2", we'd be having a different conversation.
Exactly.
Oh, no doubt.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, we'd have a different conversation because as much as some people, particularly maybe on the analytics side, don't want to admit it, size matters.
Yeah.
Matters, right? Like,
For sure.
I was a defenseman. Nobody wanted a small, short defenseman who chirped and took penalties. Nobody wanted him, which is why I'm on the show with you guys, right? Like,
you sharp?
right?
You sharp? Seriously, Shane?
Oh yeah. So nobody wanted that. So it matters. Size matters, right? And look,
right.
Again, the playoffs prove it. It doesn't mean if you're a smaller player you can't succeed. Brad Marchand's a perfect example of that. Like Jared Spurgeon is a defenseman in Minnesota, proves that. But it's just the end of the day. That's a tough. If he got drafted first overall, would I be shocked? No, I would not be shocked.
No,
like you can make a justified argument to draft him first overall for the Islanders. You could justify that and make an argument for that, and we'd sit down and have a discussion about it. But someone could make
him lose.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not, right?
Well,
like I don't,
let me add
I can always lose that.
Fans.
Yeah.
Right. Let me add this one for Islander fans. Cole Yzerman has played with James Higgins on Team USA. They've been on the same line. They've already shown some kind of chemistry together. If you draft someone like Higgins, you don't have to worry about Cole Yzerman playing anywhere else because now he's got his centerman on the Islanders, and now you're bringing in Danny Nelson into the fold along with Wisconsin left winger. Nuts. I just lost them. They were all like on Team USA at one point.
Finley, no.
But you're all bringing them into you're bringing them all in together now at this point. And like we all said, now we're hoping the development gets a little bit better. And again, a little bit to Gary's point, I don't think it really matters whether you draft Schaefer, Misa, or Higgins. If the Islanders ever got their act together with all of these crops of prospects and you don't promote that, do a prospect game, bring that back. But then you bring in a guy like Higgins, that place sells out like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean,
no.
You do that with all of
like 100%. There's a balancing act between, and that's I guarantee it's going to be a conversation with Scott and Matthew about, okay, what are we doing here? Right. What are we doing here? Like, there's a great
Quinn Finley.
It's a great advantage of having him in the fold. And you have that chemistry with Yzerman. He's a local boy. But the other thing is now externally, could you throw a lot of pressure on him? Yes, but pressure. I think pressure is internal. It's your ability to forget the long term, and you're focusing on the result and not the process. I really think pressure is internal. However, that doesn't discount the fact this is New York. I don't care that. I don't care. You're not in the city. You're in New York, right? Fans are rabid. Media is rabid. It's a highly volatile environment. One of the funnest places I come to go watch a game at either rink, whether it's downtown or on the island. The fans are bananas. I love them because they're informed, but they're not quite right in the head, and it's okay. Right. I enjoy that. It's I actually take a lot of enjoyment having conversations with people.
Oh, you and I are going to have a beer at UBS next season.
It's super fun. I enjoy it. However, it's a lot to put on a kid's shoulders. And that's where he's a kid where he should go back and play college. If they draft him first
there's no question
you got to keep him out of there for the first year. Right, you got to temper what that does is it tempers expectations, right? He's not quite ready to play pro. They could make the argument that look, he's not the biggest kid, so we just got to get bigger, right? Got to get that extra mass on him, like get into man strength, so they can build a narrative about that to keep him away for a year, right? And I think that's really important. So if they draft him, I get it. I totally
Right.
get it. I
Sure.
like if we do the draft show live from the floor at the draft, and if they say, number one, like first overall pick, proud to select James Hagens from Boston College, I'd go, okay, I understand. This is
Right.
why I'll say why I think they drafted him and go
Right.
about my business. It wouldn't have been my choice, but I totally
Correct.
understand it. And I
Right.
wouldn't, I'm not going to throw daggers at him because he's in such a small grouping of players that legitimately could take the number one spot.
Let me just ask something else with that, Shane, and I just don't have the knowledge base on this, but has there been lately a number one pick that did not start in the NHL that they?
There are a few that don't.
I haven't remembered. That's what I'm just wondering.
Yeah, if we go through if we went through the last 20 years, I could probably, if I had off the top of my head, I can't pull the names out, but there's going to be a few that don't play.
Okay. No,
my preference is, it's funny because Steve Cooley's asked me every year, oh, should this first round pick play? I'm like, first overall pick play? I'm like, no. And he goes, he laughs. He goes, so you could depress a bride on her wedding night. And I'm like, look, man, it's just, I don't want him in there because of how difficult that position is.
Right.
To put that player in that position. Look, there are outliers. There are the Sidney Crosbys and the Connor McDavids of the world who are outliers. But even most first round overall picks are not the outliers.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, right? Ovechkin didn't. Right? Man, best goal scorer of all time. He didn't play right. He didn't play right away. So why should James Hagens do that, right?
No, I mean, for all three, it's a possibility.
Well, I mean, look, here's the factor is, man, he's going down the ice, he's going to get a puck, and he meets up with Maurice Seider in Detroit.
No.
That kid's a monster.
Yeah.
He's gonna eat him. Maurice Seider, guys like that, they're trolls.
Yes.
They're gonna club him to death. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's highly skilled and elusive, and he's he's got all the skills you would ever want and all the hockey sense you ever want. He's super deceptive, but these are 225-pound behemoths, and they don't care that you're a first overall pick.
Yep,
makes it worse, actually.
Yeah, man.
Welcome to the league, rookie.
Welcome to the league, kid. I'm just gonna plaster you. Oh, if you don't like it, I'm gonna plaster you again. Honestly, it's the mindset of Chris Pronger.
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to make you not want to go there ever again. Bingo. Right? I'm going to intimidate you to the point where I'm going to wreck your game. Right? And there's those young players are so confident, and rightly so. However, it's just, maybe it's the conservative me of being this is going to be my 26th draft. And after a while, you see the theme of, okay, as history plays out, you can see outliers here and there, and maybe in a 2 or 3 year period, you see something different. But when you have that big sample size, the themes play out in that research, and you go, okay, let's play the percentages. I tend to be much more of and this is part of my education speaking too. I'm a probabilistic thinker. So I went to business school too. And so I get where Matthew Darsh is coming from. We actually have similar degrees. We have commerce degrees. And I was foolish enough to keep going back. And now I'm about a year away from finishing the PhD. So I seem intelligent, but I'm basically, my prof calls me the third line grinder of the academic world. It ain't pretty, but you just get there.
You're getting it. It's still a degree. It's still a degree. Right.
You get that goal. Yeah, you got a goal.
Yeah, no. I come up basically somebody cross-checked me and I'm bleeding and I have no teeth and, I scored a goal, but that's my academic, right? So, but what it helps you is to understand the macro and the micro at the same time.
Right.
And go, okay, let's play the odds here and understand the ceiling and the floor of a player and what he needs to, what type of environment and position do we put him in to succeed, right? So if they do take Hagens, I think it's important to sort of keep him away from the big bright lights of New York for a year, and then set the stage for him internally for that. Like add some different wingers, some bigger, stronger wingers who can protect him defensively and physically, and go do the dirty work for him if you're going to do that. You know, and you gotta, and then you have to do the same thing with Cole Eiserman.
Yes.
Like, honestly, I would almost like them both to be in Bridgeport together.
Yes.
And let them go through that, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to
I'm
do
all
that,
for it.
You got to go get, and I don't care what it costs you, you have to get a player that can play in a top line with them, but also is a really hard-nosed veteran, and you pay that player extra money.
Yep.
Like, part of your job is to mentor and insulate and protect and help these guys move along. And we are going to reward you for that. So if it costs you an extra $100,000, who cares? You pay that player $250 or $300,000. I don't care, because the long-term value of what that veteran player is going to bring to those two players is magnified. It's a compounding of it's a compounding effect. So if they do take Hagens, give him a year in college, let Eiserman play another year, and then put them both in Bridgeport together, and make the Islander fans salivate for a year, and make the Bridgeport fans go banana sandwich, because they need it after getting their ass handed to them this year, and then bring them in. And I know that is not atypical. It's not typical of what happens in the NHL. Generally, players are force-fed. But here's the thing is, I've read a lot of interesting books, particularly lately, about the majority of us humans. And, 95% of us are wrong most of the time. So why are you listening to us? Right? That's even in the NHL. But this is what everybody does. Okay, but what were their results? You're caught in dogma, right? Now, that doesn't mean you do things differently just intentionally for do something different, but look at the history of throwing kids in there. How many first-round picks just don't turn out the way they should be? They should, right? How many times have that happened in any organization? It's just, I don't know. That's where I wanted, and this is one of the things. The Islander fans have to keep sort of an open mind of what could transpire at the draft, and then what transpires after that. The only thing I could say to them, if they get Hagens and they got him and Cole Caulfield, is delay your instant gratification. I know you want to get a beer and the hot dog. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I'm the only one celebrating. I would be one of the only ones celebrating.
Or it'd be remember Smoking the Bandit? And Buford T. Justice pulls those guys over, and he's at the car, and he says, "I gotta leave. Put your hands on the car." Now, you can't leave. You can think about it, but don't do it. Right? That's what I'm telling the Islander fans. You can think about it, but don't do it. Right? Hold on, because what you're trying to what you're looking for is, do you want to make a splash and be excited for a year, or do you want to win a cup? What do you want to do? You haven't won a cup in a long time. Right? 83. You've had some chances, but when have you ever had you haven't had a first overall pick in a long time, right? Correct. So enjoy it, right? And you couldn't have been happier for Ken Morrow. What a great guy.
No,
and if you haven't met him before,
we have. Yeah.
Salt of the earth, a great guy. I bumped into him at drafts and at the rink, because he's a pro scout. So yeah, happy for him for that, because the franchise has been maligned for a little while. You've had spurts where you've had runs. We're holy Jesus, this team's going on a run, but there's never been this sustained again. Plus, also it will irk Russ Cohen, because he's a Rangers fan, right?
I know,
right?
Yeah,
right.
Yep,
so that's it too. So now Adam Woden. As you know, he college hockey news. He's a big Islanders guy. So then, the thing is, I can pit those two against him, and I can be the guy that goes to the zoo and throws peanuts to the monkeys at the monkey cage. Dance, monkey dance, right? Oh, nothing more, fun to irk Russ.
And
in
then
that
get
regard,
Boomer Gordon on it too.
Oh yeah. No. We'll it'll be one side or the other. We'll just smack him around like a Mexican piñata. It'll be great.
Absolutely. That's a show. That's a show. All right, boys and girls, we all have a hockey game to watch. Gary, give me your final thoughts real quick.
As I said, when I like I said, when I went to that thing last year and he was there, I was like, I kept saying, wow, would it be great? And now that possibility actually existed, I'm really not leaning as much to it as I originally did. I see the pluses and minuses on both sides, but as an Islander fan, we again, just as Shane eloquently put it, you got to just calm down. Let's see what happens. This is not a Connor McDavid type draft where number one's going to be the impact player. It just happens to be the year where there's great guys, but they're going to be great, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. You've got to stay the course. Right. So whoever they pick up, and my gut tells me Schaefer too, it's going to be somebody that's going to help this team for a dozen years or more.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen October 1, 2025.
I agree.
2026, get it on board, get it going, get it done. But let's just savor the fact that we got the number one pick.
Oh, no, you guys are fortunate. I will be doing the draft live from the draft floor at the Peacock Theater in LA. So the minute that pick is done, I'll be tweeting out, hey, boys, there's your pick. So I'll let you guys.
There will be a draft party at UBS Arena.
Yeah, I will. We'll get the player, whoever the player is, on. He comes on the show, and then I will send me a text, and I'll ask the question for you guys.
Absolutely.
While we have them live. So man, if you're going to be a diehard fan, you're going to be crazy enough to have a podcast and get me on the show, by all means,
right, man. I love these things.
You deserve it, right? You deserve it. Hey, man, look, I was a long time. We're all fans, right? I had to put my fandom away because that's the nature of the business. But that doesn't mean I'm not there's still parts of me where I have to control that bias.
Right.
Yeah, so it happens, right? Even after all this time, it still happens.
Shane, real quick, where can everyone find you on social media?
Twitter is HP Radio, or at Shane Malloy on Twitter is the easiest place to find me. So that gives you all the times of when the show's on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. This weekend is our part 1 of 4 parts of our draft preview show. So we're going to review my 1 through 32. So we're going to do 8 hours of draft preview show. Wow. We've already done 6 hours of player profiles. So we did 24 prospect profiles of draft players. So altogether, we're going to do 14 hours of draft preview. So, we're maniacs. Well, honestly, we could probably do more.
Well, let's put it this way. You're keeping the streets of Milford, Pennsylvania safe because we know where Paul's going to be sitting for the next 14 hours.
I have it. I'm ready. That's how I spend my Sundays sometimes, or Saturdays. It's just there. I listen to it all the time.
Yeah, so, I have Jason Bukala on this show with me this weekend. So he's going to be reviewing my 1 through 32. So he's fantastic, and he throws barbs at me too, which I appreciate. We don't always have to see eye to eye, but we're about 80%.
But that's what makes the show, though.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, no. We have to have we need intellectual discourse.
Sure.
I've always formatted the show as it's a bunch of people sitting at a pub drinking a beer, talking hockey. That's all it is, and we try to put ourselves in a position we're not experts. We're just learned colleagues who happen to really love hockey, right?
Beautiful.
And that's it. And we're happy to share what we've learned because I've been mentored by scouts. I've been really very, very fortunate in that regard. So I've been mentored all along the way by scouts and assistant GMs, directors of player development, so that all the knowledge that I've accumulated from them, I learn, and it's incumbent upon me to share it back with everybody else because I owe it to everybody else and I owe it to the game. You don't hoard your knowledge and everything you've learned. You got to pass it along and, pass it along to the people that are passionate about the game and their team. So, and you guys are both crazy. So,
yes,
it's great to come on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. Listen, go ahead, Gary.
No, I'm just saying, when you get to UBS Arena, please let me know.
I will. Yeah. We'll have fun. Yeah, no,
Oh, yeah,
I'd love
for
to
sure.
sit around all the Islander fans in the group. Right?
Yes.
That'd be
Oh,
great.
I got a crazy
We'll
bunch
enjoy
in my section. You'll be fine.
My final thoughts, Islander fans, real quick. This is just the discussion without the Islanders doing anything before the draft. Maybe they make a trade or two. Maybe something else happens. We don't know. This is just simply with the Islanders holding the number one pick. We'll see what Matthew Darsh does before the draft. At the draft, we'll find out and we'll go from there. Folks, thank you for coming on. Don't forget to
Oh, and
follow
don't
Isles
forget,
Talk.
Islander fans that are listening live, sorry about this, Paul, but there is a press conference with Matthew Darch tomorrow at 11 o'clock. If you
Right.
have the Islander app on your phone, that's where it will be. So you can get your first glimpse into our new general manager tomorrow morning.
Don't forget to follow Isles Talk on X at Isles Talk. Please like and follow us on Facebook, and please, 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 please hit that like and subscribe button on Isles Talk. You'll find the show there. You'll find Shane's show with me from two seasons ago. You'll find that there as well, where it's a little more in depth on the draft in general. So for Shane Malloy, Gary Harding, my name is Paul Kreischer. Thank you guys so much for coming on. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks where we'll talk armchair GM. What are the Islanders going to do? Draft Misa, draft Schaefer, draft Higgins, draft whoever you want. It'll be your show in about 2 weeks. So thanks, guys. You guys have a game to watch. Have fun with that. For me, go Florida. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Take care.